Canada entered the war in 1939. And I've noticed a lot of my friends, the older friends of mine, were joining the service to fight for the Queen, England, and Canada. But I was too young. I couldn't join any service because I was just too young. So school kids were gathering scrap metals, and they were grabbing tin foil and all kinds of stuff they were getting for the war effort. Old ladies were knitting mitts, and they were knitting scarves and sweaters to keep their soldiers warm. Everybody had to have a ration card. I had a ration card to buy certain things from the grocery store. You couldn't buy gasoline without a ration card. And a lot of my friends that came to town were farm boys, and they went to join the services, and they were sent home. Because they were sent home, because they were farm boys, and they needed the farm boys to grow food for the war effort. Otherwise, they couldn't feed England, and they couldn't feed the Air Force, and they couldn't feed the Army overseas. They had to have the farm boys at home. My mother worked in a war factory in Woodstock, and she made big bullets. She made bullets. She always said that she made the bullets and her boys fired them. The Navy was the only service that would take young boys at 17 years of age. So I hitchhiked into London to join the Navy when I was 17 years old in 1942. They welcomed me with open arms and said that they'd have to send a letter home with me for my mother to sign to get her permission, to get a merchant's permission, and to get the chief of police's permission and a preacher from a church. Well, I can tell you, it took some awful talking to get my mother to sign, but when she finally signed, Mr. Statham, the merchant, signed, Chief Tanton, the town cop, signed, and the Reverend Honeyman from the Presbyterian Church signed. So with the letter, I trotted off into London. They took the letter, and they gave me a fast medical and a Navy uniform, and I was now a Royal Canadian Navy Volunteer Reserve. Right away, I had to learn seamanship, I had to learn knots and splices, I had to learn the Morse code, and I had to learn read messages with flags. I don't know whether they call that semaphore or not. Maybe they did. I forget what they call it. Anyhow, I only had about a week or so to learn, and I found myself on a troop train leaving London for the East Coast. The troop train was nothing but servicemen. A couple of cars were strictly Army, a couple of cars were strictly Air Force, and a couple of cars was strictly Navy. And we headed for the East Coast of Canada. Some of the guys to board troop ships for overseas, but I ended up at HMCS Cornwallis in Halifax to take training, mostly on large guns, cannons and stuff. And I had to learn that within about a week or so, because I ended up on an old fishing tug, because Canada had no fighting ships, only just a few, one or two or something, nothing. And the Germans, after World War I, started getting ready for World War II, and they had 300 or 400 U-boats, submarines, out on that Pacific Ocean, just waiting for our convoys to come through. This first ship I was on, HMCS Beaver No. 1, it was an old fishing scow, but it had minesweeper gear on the back. So I was out there in this old fishing boat, sweeping for mines. The Germans were laying mines in the shipping lanes, in blowing up our ships. Well, I wasn't on it too long, and I was drafted on HMCS Annapolis, an old World War I destroyer given to Canada from the United States because Canada still didn't have any fighting ships. So I was drafted on that, and there's a whole bunch of us drafted on at the same time, all boys my age, all 17. I don't think the captain was very old either, but as we come aboard, the captain lined us up amidship and gave us our welcome aboard talk. And he says, now you can forget all that stuff they taught you ashore. We're going to sea to fight a war. And he wasn't kidding. We grew from boys to men pretty darn fast, because the first 2 or 3 trips out, we were so darn seasick, we couldn't hardly do our job. But we had to do our job. One man not doing his job could put, with the Germans out there with their submarines and the mines and everything, one man not doing his job we could end up with our ship below the waves. Okay, so anyhow, my first job, and for 3 months, I was a crow's nest lookout. And a crow's nest lookout on most small ships, they were never intended to be in the open seas in the North Atlantic, I can tell you. Because the waves out in that North Atlantic sometimes is 40 feet high as the eave troughs in this house. And then you're sitting at the top of one of these waves and looking way down in the hala. First thing you know, the ship falls, and you're down looking up at them. Anyhow, and the meals, they were out of food in a few days, outside just canned stuff. The cook, I don't know how he ever got anything hot anyhow, because he had a hook in the ceiling and a chain and a kettle, and the only time the damn kettle ever seen any blasted fire was when it passed over the fire when it was doing this. Anyhow, each department had to go down, get the food from the galley and take it down to the mess. And afterwards, 2 duty watch guys had to wash the dishes, clean up the mess. Quite often, taking the water out to throw overboard, the silver went overboard with it. It was hard to steal any silver from another mess because they guarded their silver pretty darn close. But what made it worse was when they went to throw the dishwater over the side and the ship lurched and the dishpan went too, why we ended up scrubbing the dishes with the pail we scrubbed the deck with. and we were always sopping wet down in there. The waves would come in, there was always water in there, and the cold water in the ocean coming on the top of the steel deck always dripped water. We were wet all the time. Anyhow, in about 3 months, I graduated to be an able seaman. So when I graduated to be an able seaman, I was put in the wheelhouse. And I still might have been 17, early 18, I forget. But I was a helmsman steering the ship. And that was fine. I got along just great. I steered the ship. I had 2 compasses. I had the magnetic compass and I had the gyro compass. But being an old World War destroyer, sometimes the cables from the helm and the wheelhouse would break, and the cables up the back to the tiller flats where the engine was to turn the gutter would break. And I'd have to go back there on the after gun deck, out in the open, with this old magnetic compass and steer the ship, and you were sopping wet all the time back out there. And I couldn't keep on course back there worth a hooch, but nobody ever complained. But I was always awful glad to get back into the wheelhouse. And I was on what they call the triangle run then. The Germans called it the happy hour because we had no ships enough, and they were waiting just outside of the Canada and the United States. And popping off our convoys going out. We were losing the war out there. And the Triangle Run went from Boston to New York to Halifax to Newfoundland, St. John's, Newfoundland. And we'd go into each one of those ports, fuel up, get supplies as fast as we could, and join convoys out there and lose some of the ships. When I was on the Triangle Run on the destroyer, we dropped a lot of depth charges on U-boats. My brother was a year younger than me, so he couldn't join the Navy for a year after I did. But he took an Aztec course. My brother, he was on convoy duty from St. John's, Newfoundland to Londonderry, Ireland, taking convoys back and forth both ways. We did convoy duty too, but our Aztec was old Aztec. And our old Aztec, if we'd get a ping on a U-boat, we'd lose it right away. Our Aztec was no good in brackish water. Brackish water is where fresh water mixes with salt water. And the British wanted to put the new Aztec on our ships. Mackenzie King wouldn't put the new Aztec on our ships because it was going to cost the Canadians money, and there was an election coming up. And he had us guys out there on safe ships. And the Germans were right up into the St. Lawrence River, sinking our ships. The people living along the shore of the St. Lawrence River couldn't report all the dead bodies that was coming ashore. And that was supposed to be all hushed up. Canada, the people in Canada didn't really know that we were at war much. Halfway across the ocean was known as the Black Pit. Too far for the bombers to fly out from Iceland, too far for them to fly from St. John's, Newfoundland, and too far to fly from England. And the Germans waited there in wolf packs. And for our convoys to get through there, we lose a lot of ships. We could be there, like, a convoy would maybe have 80 or 90 ships, and only 4 ships one at the front, one at the back, and one on each side to keep the U-boats away. We could keep a U-boat away, but we were keeping it away. They could sneak in and pop off 2 or 3 of our freighters. We were losing the war out there till the middle of 1944, I guess. We were losing the war. And then they moved, the Admiralty was in Ottawa, and they moved the Admiralty to Halifax and to St. John's, Newfoundland. Then things started to change. That's when they started having all the ship builders along the coast, both on the west coast of Canada and the east coast and the United States, making corvettes, frigates, and destroyers, and we were getting some help out there. The war started to change a little bit. We got back, we got the whole ship's company came down with the scabies. That's a little bug that eats you up under the skin. I was bleeding down my right side and under my arm because we were out there a couple of weeks after I got the scabies. Everybody on board had the scabies. So when we got back to Halifax, they loaded us on the trucks and took us to Rockhead Hospital in Halifax. And when we got to the hospital, we had to take all our clothes off outside in the parking lot and march in and leave your clothes piled nicely with your military number. Every piece of clothing you had when you joined the Navy had your military number on it. And leave your clothes so they knew whose clothes they wear, and march us into a big shower room. And in this big shower room, it was just a great big room, real big, and it had showers all the way around the wall. And the medical officer of health sat in a glass cage up by the ceiling, and he controlled all the water temperatures and everything. And 2 guys to a shower. And he got the water so hot, he got our skins red, really. And and we reached into a door and got a brush and some kind of stuff, and you had to scrub your partner all over, and he had to scrub you all over. Of course, the water was shut off then, so they marched us into a great big place where we went to bed for the night. That was full of a lot of beds in there, great big room. There must have been 160 of us guys. The next morning when they come to get us, our skin was so tight we could hardly move. But we had to go back and into the showers and go all through this again. We did that 3 times. And then the fourth time back in, the medical officer of health looked us all over and said we were scabies free. In the meantime, our ship was disinfected and steam cleaned, and our uniforms were disinfected and cleaned and free of scabies too, and the ship was free of scabies, and we were free of scabies, and we went to sea. Maybe I was out there about 3 weeks, and I was drafted off into HMCS Peregrine, which is a big Navy base. We called them stone frigates. There were 6 of us off of the Annapolis that were able seamen, and we ended up at Peregrine, and we were drafted to HMCS Naden, an Esquimalt on Vancouver Island. So they sent us 6 guys by train to all the way across Canada to Vancouver to pick up a spanking brand new aircraft carrier, HMS Punching. It was made in Algoma, Washington, and it's the 2nd carrier that was manned by Canadians. The ship was taken up to Esquimalt at HMCS Naden and had to have some more work done on it a bit to meet the Royal Navy standards, which the United States didn't have. In the meantime, there was an old World War I shed there that we slept in. There was 2 times I got into a bit of trouble there. The first time, Ken Coulter from Windsor went to bed, and the officer of the watch decided we should have a fire drill at 3 o'clock some morning. Came along and shook us to get out of bed because we had to go out to the fire. And we said the hell with the fire and went back to sleep. He just got the 4-inch fire hose and blew us out of bed. We have 4 inches of water. I suppose this great big building was 1,000 feet long because it took in all kinds of ships. If we didn't have all that water cleaned up by the bugle in the morning, we were in trouble. We just looked at one another, we'll never get that water cleaned up. So we went down to the carpenter shop and got some brazen bits, because there was no basement out of this old building. It was just sand underneath it. So we moved the bunks out very easily, drilled holes, and all the water went down the hole. Well, we got away with that all right, just fine, because they didn't know how we got rid of the water, but we did. And then the next time I got into trouble, it was a Sunday morning, and we were all supposed to go to church. We didn't want to go to church. So they had the old-fashioned big lockers. So we decided if some of us guys would get in our lockers with a flashlight and a book, we could sit in there and read. We'd send one guy off to the church, and when he come back, he could unlock the lockers and let us out. That was working just fine, just perfect. Until a couple of those screwballs decided they should have a cigarette in there. And there was holes in the top, and the smoke was coming out. First thing I knew, I could hear sirens coming from all over the country. The sirens from Victoria, Esquimalt, Navy Yard, and all over was coming because the barracks was on fire. But it wasn't on fire when they opened the doors up. There was us guys sitting there with a flashlight reading. And so we had to fall in the next day with the black enlistment. In the meantime, the puncher sailed that first thing that morning. So when it was time for me to fall in with the black enlistment, I was halfway down the west coast of the United States. So I didn't get charged with that at all. So anyhow, we went down the west coast of the United States. We went into Bremerton and got our ammunition. We went into San Francisco and got some stuff. We went into San Diego. We got more stuff. There was a bunch of guys. I was billeted with the flight deck party. I was lucky, I think. I didn't tell the other guys that I had been on 2 ships and I was unable to see them. The whole crew came. The whole crew was brand new. Never went to sea before. And they were all about 17 years old. And of course, by this time, I might have been 18 and a half, maybe just 19, I don't know. Anyhow, I didn't tell them I was unable to see them. But I noticed they all kind of watched me. They looked at our hangar deck and our flight deck with twin-tail night fighters, the latest night fighters developed by the United States Air Force. We took them from New York to Casablanca, Africa, for the invasion of southern France. And while we were there, the air transport of the United States was so thankful to get those ships over there, so they made a trip for off-duty men on the Puncher to take a trip up to a place called Rabat to the Sultan's Palace. We went up by truck to the Sultan's Palace, visited the Sultan's Palace, and they served us a lunch in the Sultan's Gardens. White tablecloths, red napkins, and food that I never even knew existed. And I never knew it such elegantly existed, coming from Strasbourg. But boy, it was wonderful. So we set sail out of Casablanca, and they shot us back to Norfolk, Virginia, where they loaded our hangar deck and flight deck with Thunderbolt fighters. And we joined a convoy coming from Australia. We joined another convoy coming out of the Newfoundland. And when we joined convoy, we had 150 Thunderbolt fighting planes on board. And as we were taking them into Liverpool, England, we got word that our sister ship, the Nabob, had been torpedoed up off the coast of Norway. So we had to go up and take her place. So we had to went up into Glasgow and took on all kinds of supplies and everything. And we headed for Scapa Flow up in the Orkney Islands. That was a big naval base up there. On the way up, our squadron flew on. We had Barracudas, Avengers, Fireflies, and Wildcats. We were up there at Scapa Flow. All these planes were coming and going. But in the meantime, on the way around to the Panama Canal, I was taking special training on the crash barriers. Like when a plane come into land, they lowered a hook and it had to catch a wire going across the deck. And if for any reason at all it missed that wire, I had to put barriers up and they had to fly right into it because they were still flying. And if I let one go through, I couldn't let one go through. I had to stop them, no matter what. I had to stop them because the rest of my division was ahead of the barriers, folding wings, parking planes, putting some of them down in the hangar deck, putting torpedoes on them, putting mines on them, putting bombs on them, putting more .5s in the wings, ready to go again. We were making raids on all the German-held submarine bases along the coast of Norway, as well as doing convoy duty for the Russians above the Arctic Circle on the Barents Sea. We pretty well ended up with just Barracudas because they were the biggest planes. The other Royal Navy ships really couldn't handle them. Us being Canadians, we found a way that we could handle them. We put 2, they called them retog, we called them rockets on each side of our plane. So when they got partway up the flight deck, the pilot pushed a button and they shot them up in the air. They could carry heavier bomb loads. So we ended up pretty well with Barracudas for the rest of the war. We was up there quite a long time, about a year, I suppose. And England always looked after their ships. We had to go back to Glasgow for have our ship overhauled or a quick overhaul, and we'd get 5 days leave every time they did that. This is the first time we had to go back anyhow. So we went back to Glasgow, and I got 5 days leave, being these other guys that was with me. And we got free passes on the buses and on the trains, and we didn't have to pay anything. We could ride all the stuff free in England, Ireland, and Scotland. And we used the trains for our bedrooms at night. And the trains over there have these little single departments where there's just 2 seats, one on each side, bench seats. And we just find one of these that nobody was in it. And we didn't care where the train was going, but we found out in the morning where we was. And the people up there, we had Canada on our sleeves, and they were amazed that people from Canada spoke English. They got along great with us, and if we got into a pub, they always bought us a free drink. Anyhow, we ended up back in Glasgow, yeah, because we got back there a couple of days ahead of time, and I was standing on the corner of Sauchiehall and Renfield, which is the main corner of Glasgow, and in the pouring rain, and this little girl got a hold of me, took pity on me, standing out there in the rain, took me home. I met her father and her mother and her sisters. Her brothers were all away off fighting the war. And I was served a cup of tea and a bun. There just was one big room like this, and there was holes cut in with curtains, and that's where you slept for the night. So I was in there, just got into bed and covered up and nothing like that. And the little girl stuck her head in, wanted to know if I was decent. I said, yeah, I'm decent. She said that she knew I had to be up early in the morning. She says, I'll knock you up in the morning and take you back to the tram so that you get back to your ship. And they were very nice people, and they were really good to us. And I did. I got back to the ship, and we got back up to Scapa Flow. I never got back there again. Well, then the next time we got down there, we went to London, England. We took this here, it was a Knights of Columbus hostel. And it was a big U-shaped place. And in the center of that big U, there was a big church. It was just getting ready for bed when the air raid sirens went. We said, to hell with the air raid sirens. We went to bed. I was up the next morning. This old lady come in, some old grandmother with clean sheets and everything. Oh, wasn't it awful? Oh, wasn't it awful? I said, yeah, it was a murder, wasn't it? And I looked out the window, and that church was nothing but a bunch of steeples out there. She must have took a direct hit. The church was gone. And our window wasn't even broken. Us guys didn't even wake up. I guess we got down to Trafalgar Square. The war ended right then. As we got there, the war ended. Germany and Europe had laid down their arms. Thousands of people there. Some people were crying, some people were happy, some people were just... That's where I was when World War II ended, on Trafalgar Square, London, England. So I got back to the ship, and of course, due to the fact we had to stay at full war strength in the Royal Canadian Navy until all the submarines were accounted for, because they still would be out there, didn't know the war was over, and they'd be torpedoing ships yet. So we were out there doing that. They finally, I guess, they got all the submarines in. We went into Glasgow, and they took all our airplanes off and everything, and they put on Wildcats. Oh, and our captain, he used to get a brand new big carrier, and he said all the guys off of the puncher that would volunteer would go with him on this new carrier. So we all volunteered. And in the meantime, we were to go out into the Irish Sea and train United States pilots on Wildcats. And we made our anchorage at night on Douglas on the Isle of Man and Bangor, Ireland. That was going along pretty good. We were doing pretty good. And all of a sudden, there was word that the United States dropped the bomb and ended the war. So we went back into Glasgow, and they took everything out of our hangar deck and took the bunks out of HMCS Niobe, which was a big Canadian base over there just north of Glasgow, and turned us into a troop ship. So for the rest of the war, we were a troop ship taking Army, Navy, and Air Force back to Canada. And I was on it for the first trip back to Canada, and we had thousands and thousands of guys. The ocean was a little rough, and most of those Army guys and Air Force guys were seasick. But most of the Navy guys, well, some of those guys were seasick too. But we'd have several thousand people coming back. And the second time back, I was drafted off. I was drafted back into Peregrine again, and had a quick medical, and was sent to HMCS Prevost in London, Ontario, for my discharge.